Hello and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show. My name is Wendy Greene and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And this is the show for those of us who believe we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. I also want to wish you happy Juneteenth. It is a new federal holiday, started about 2 years ago now, I guess. And it celebrates the emancipation of slavery. And really in Texas, they did not find out that slaves had been freed for almost 2 years after the war ended because of travel time, I guess. But anyway, happy Juneteenth. We are celebrating that today. So I have a question for you. Do you think a sculptor can become an accomplished writer? Or a writer could become an accomplished painter? Is creativity something that we're born with? Or do you think it's something that we can nurture and develop as we grow and age and mature? And while you're pondering that, let me ask you another question. Imagine, if you will, that something terrible happened to someone in your family or, a child, a grandchild, and it was because of something unjust that a person in power did, and it could have been prevented. How far do you think you would go to try to right that injustice? How far would you go to correct that wrong? It's a tough question. And the book we're going to talk about, You Should Have Known, by Rebecca Keller, addresses this dilemma. This is Rebecca's first published novel after spending most of her adult life as a visual artist and a sculptor and a teacher. So our conversation will focus on reinvention and creativity, and then the justice, revenge, and complicity addressed in her book. But before I bring her on, I have just a few announcements for you. Lots of people are traveling again now that the world has opened up after COVID. And my preferred way to travel is with Road Scholar. They're the not-for-profit leader in educational travel for boomers and beyond, and for grandparents and their grandchildren. And Road Scholar has tours to all 50 states and more than 100 countries. Take a look at all that they have to offer by going to roadscholar.org/heyboomer, and be sure to include the /heyboomer so they know you heard about Road Scholar from Hey Boomer. I also want to tell you about my newest affiliate sponsor. It's called Annie's Kit Club, and it delivers creativity right to your mailbox. You will get a new shipment every month and all the supplies and instructions that you need to create something beautiful. Whether you like crocheting, quilting, knitting, or other crafts, Annie's has a club for you. And they even offer clubs that offer variety, which is what I have subscribed to. And just recently, I'm working on some coasters that are geometric designs, kind of fun. So no matter your age, your skill level, or your crafting interest, you can explore your favorite hobbies with convenient kits that are just right for you. Check out Annie's Kit Clubs with an S.com and use promo code BOOMER when you check out to get 50% off your first order. And one more thing, I want to encourage you to join the Boomer Banter tomorrow night. It's a monthly community gathering where we have fun, discuss topics of interest, and build connections. It's really about building community. So we meet at 6:30 on the third Tuesday of every month. So tomorrow night will be the third Tuesday in June, and our topic is travel. So if you'd like to try it out, drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz and I will send you the Zoom link. All right, done with announcements, and I am going to bring Rebecca on. Hello, Miss Rebecca.
Hi, how are you?
I am well. I'm so excited, really, to have you on the show today. I loved your book.
I'm really glad to be here.
So let me do just a brief bio of you. So Rebecca Keller is a writer, an internationally exhibited artist, a college professor, a Fulbright scholar, and recipient of awards from the National Endowment of the Arts. But once upon a time, she was a house cleaner, a shuttle driver, a waitress, a nursing home cook. She got a graduate degree to improve her lot and ended up working in museums where she wrote about art and gave tours, making her own work at night. Then she had children. She began teaching at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and she did a TEDx talk. And then she began writing fiction. Quite a reinvention story, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what have you learned through all of those changes?
Oh boy. That stubbornness helps.
Are you stubborn?
Yeah, yeah. That kind of a willingness just to take a leap helps. That being willing to that energy helps. Being willing to work very hard at things. Um, when you list the litany of jobs I had when I was in college and before college and after college, I I'm thrilled to realize where I am now, because at that moment I really didn't have any kind of map or pathway or any idea of how I would get to where am now, except kind of a vague notion that I really wanted to, a kind of a sense of the kind of life I wanted to have, which is driven by being able to spend time with in creative expression. I knew I wanted to teach because I'm a really good teacher, and I knew that being in the classroom gives me a very deep kind of satisfaction. It forces me to learn.
Sure. Yeah.
It really does. There's nothing like teaching to make you have to be
Yeah,
aware
right.
of what you know, what you don't know, and to force you to find language for it.
Yeah.
Um, it's a good question what I've learned. I do know that stubbornness is important, that imagining a future, even if you don't know how to get there, was very important to me. And having a kind of magpie brain where things that I see stick. Shiny objects stick in my head. Shiny objects meaning like little bits of information or knowledge that fascinate me, but that also feed the imagination. So all of those things kind of help. I don't really know really how to answer that question, because there's so many little things that all
There's
add up.
so many things that you described, that you had a vision, but you weren't sure what the vision was really, where it was going to take you, but you didn't want to stop pursuing it. You were curious and brave, I think.
I think
Um,
curiosity is highly underrated, and uncertainty, a willing to venture into areas where you're uncertain, and a willingness to make mistakes
Were
and
there
be.
people that supported you? I mean, there had to be times that you were feeling, oh my gosh, this is too much. I can't do this, or had self-doubts, things like that. Were there people that were supporters of you as you went through all of this?
Yeah, my family, certainly, my kids and my husband, friends. Also, I mentioned teaching before. Um, when you tell your students, give it a shot, try something, that reinforces your own, you know, capacities, I think. And so I think that really teaching has been uh, fundamental, because you can't tell your students to take risks. You can't say that all the time. You can't say, try it again, but do better this time, or you can, start over, but don't give up. You can't keep saying that and not have some of it stick on your in your own, in your own mentality. So I really do think that being privileged enough to teach young artists and young writers and people who want to explore making things and being creative has been really good for me as somebody who wants to make my own work.
So you inspire yourself when you're inspiring them.
Yeah, I mean, you want to hold yourself accountable,
Right.
and of course they want to know what you're working on, what you're thinking about. So it kind of forces
I'm
you
grading your
to
papers.
step up.
Yeah.
Keep busy, get going.
Right.
Mhm.
So you're teaching young artists. Talk to me about creativity. Do you think everybody has the ability to be creative, or is it kind of in your DNA?
Yeah, boy. I think there's a spectrum of a continuum. I think some people are, but I do think all of us have creativity that can be developed and trained. Um, but creativity itself is a kind of hard thing to define. I think in terms of like making things, like being an artist or being a writer or a musician, or that's also a particular avenue for creativity. So there's this thing called creativity, and then there's the way it's manifested or expressed. I do think that most of us have sort of creative, imaginative um, parts of us inherent, but many people have not had the opportunity to develop them. And then other people are really good at things, at manifesting things, like they're really good at drawing, or they can play by ear, they have perfect pitch. But their approach to making those things is not particularly creative. You know what I mean? So putting the two
Yeah.
together, a creative imagination and a craft or approach to getting it out into the world, those two things are I don't want to say they're rare, but they, I think, are many of us, many people, I think, uh, have not been able to connect those two things in their lives.
Yeah.
Or they want to and they didn't somehow in their career, and then maybe when they retire or maybe at a certain moment they think, yes, now is the time.
Yeah, because I think when we're young, we get told in school, the grass is green, the sky is blue, and your sky is brown. And so that's not right. And so you start to think, well, I can't do it. But when I teach and talk about creativity, I also try to expand it outside of the art realm.
Yeah,
Like you can be creative in your cooking and creative in your gardens and creative in what you wear. And
absolutely. Yeah, and that's what I mean by there's all kinds of avenues for creativity, and it's a way of thinking and being in the world, a way of being curious and imaginative. But the how it's manifested is very varied. And I think, as you say, a lot of people maybe start pursuing one thing, they end up pursuing something else, or they end up dropping it, but it finds other ways. It finds leaks out in other ways.
do you have certain imagination or creativity exercises you do with your students that would help them get past a block?
I do. I do. Like, for example, there's a number of things that often come up, I find, in teaching. One is that your first attempt at anything is often kind of crappy. You know that, like the writer's saying, is shitty first drafts. Of course they're shitty, but it's a first draft. So focus focus on what's under your belt, and then start kind of digging down. So one of the things that is important is not stopping too soon.
Hmm.
Is continuing to push. I recently had a conversation with someone who, was using some imagery that was kind of cliched. And I was like, if you went to the store that was labeled this kind of imagery, and you walked in, this would be the first three things on the shelf that you just grabbed and stuck. What would happen if you went into the warehouse or went into the basement and poked around in the corners and tried to find kind of the interesting things that had been left there by the grandpa who founded the store 50 years ago. You know,
Yeah.
so kind of poke around, bang at it a little bit, and see what comes up. Um,
Yeah.
and be willing um, to recognize that it's not a failure. It just isn't cooked enough. You
Right.
you
Right.
have maybe the ingredients, but you need to make the sauce a little thicker. Another thing I often do actually is I'll have people make lists and of ideas, and I'll tell them set a timer for 5 minutes and just free write, list, ideas, associations, whatever. No rules. Just the only rule is you keep going for 5 minutes. And that is so hard. That
It's
is so
so
hard.
hard. Yeah.
And then after that, I'll say, okay, do it again.
Oh, no.
Right.
5 more minutes?
And I don't care if you repeat it, it doesn't matter. But just and the purpose, and I'll have people sometimes do it up to 3 times. And then I'll have them go and start circling things that they see are connected. And it's not like there's some rule, but it begins to unpack and create unexpected connections, and it helps them give a map of their own imagination. But what it also does is it defeats your internal editor, because
I
your
love
internal
that.
editor is the
Yeah.
voice that says that's stupid. No,
Mhm.
that's stupid. No, that's stupid. And if you tell your editor, if you need an editor at a certain point, but if it kicks in too soon, it shuts things down.
Yeah.
So to defeat that, to get past that, you just overwhelm it. with-
I love that because because by the time you get to that second or third list, you're
it's
done with the
exhausting.
editor. You're just putting stuff down.
Right. And you
And
get
you
past all these things, and suddenly you find yourself in the zone, and then
yeah,
I've seen students just fill butcher paper full of stuff.
that's
Um,
great
but you have to
idea.
get past the beginning. You have to get past
Yeah.
the, ugh, you
I
know.
know, right?
Um, and
Right.
then when that happens, ideas really do start to flow. Um,
That's a great idea. I love that.
yeah, it's a
So
helpful.
did you use that when you started writing You Should Have Known?
No, actually, the DNA for You Should Have Known came. Um, thank you. It came. The very beginning of it was a story, a very short story, meant that I wrote many years ago,
Mm.
and I never actually published it. It was, but I liked it. I liked the idea of it, and so that was one thing. Then and at the time I'd been writing a lot of short fiction, and
Okay.
um, but I decided that I wanted to write a novel, and I wanted it to be about this kind of morally complicated story where right and wrong, often right and wrong isn't quite so clear cut. And people who we normally think of as really good people can be tempted from the straight and narrow. Uh, what would make that happen? What circumstances would make that happen? And if I centered the book on someone doing that, how can I make them still be have their audience still be in their corner and not turn on them? Not break faith with the character that they thought they were reading about. Excuse me. So, uh, so I began kind of that short story had because it was kind of this weird twisty thing where somebody did something that was kind of coming in sideways a little bit at a problem, and the problem was retribution.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of stuck in my mind. Uh, then another short story that I'd written had a few images in it that made me think, oh, yeah, that those two things mashed together gave me one of the mother-daughter dynamic, actually,
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
eventually. They were the kind of beginning DNA. And then what kind of helped me fall into place was a setting. As you know, the book is set in an assisted living facility. And when my mother entered an assisted living facility, it occurred to me that a place like that would be a great place to set a novel because it's a closed, semi-closed environment. People in it have a lot of history. There's a lot of potential for old grudges, old angers. And because people are older and perhaps not always, their memory's not always reliable, there's also the potential for doubts about what exactly is reality. So it
Mm-hmm.
struck me as a really great place to think about setting a novel. And so all of those strands came together in a way that kind of surprised me. But they came together and then they came apart and then they came together. I ended up rewriting the last half of the book, last third of the book, 3 different times.
Is that right? Well, as you all can hear from just the pieces of the story that she kind of teased you with, it's a fascinating book. I mean, I couldn't put it down. I find lately I'm reading and I fall asleep and I'm reading and I fall asleep. I could not put this down. I was really
Great.
involved with it. And I think I said this to you. My only thing is I wish Frannie was a little older
Yeah.
because she's 70 and I'm going to be 70. And I'm like,
She's 72.
okay, she's 72.
72, yeah. Although I think I mentioned to you, when I originally wrote the book, I had her as an older character.
Yeah.
And my publisher, who is wonderful, but multiple people in the industry said, we cannot sell a book centering an 80-year-old woman.
So there's
So
an ageist comment for you, isn't it?
well, yes. And, I mean, it's a chicken and egg thing, right? Because agents and publishers, they want to sell in the world as it exists, even if they wish it were different.
Yeah.
And of course, as authors, it's a tricky thing. You want to focus on an older character, but you also want to get it out into the world.
Right.
And so this was, a series of compromises that the story, I had to make almost no other compromise about the story.
Oh, that's great.
People did say, we believe in this book. We want this story to be out there. It is centering an older person, but we need them to be a little bit younger.
Yeah.
To be able to market it. And it's tricky. It's tricky.
And she was injured. So that's part of the reason she was there. It's not as much because she was 72.
Right.
It was because she had been injured. So one of the things you talked about is the sense that as we get older, we become more invisible. People don't see us anymore. And that was kind of almost an excuse for Frannie to be able to do what she did. So will you talk about that a little bit?
She, on the one hand, I think she resented that, because when people, especially when they enter into an assisted living facility, she's clearly, in her right mind. Frannie's very sharp and she's very capable. She has lots of agency and lots of interests, as many people do, even in an assisted living facility for whatever reason they're there. And certainly being older, it's not like you cross an invisible line and suddenly cease to be yourself. And she, was a sharp, funny, kind of sardonic, kind, compassionate person. And so she, I think she resented it that people stopped seeing her as an individual and started seeing her as old.
I think she did.
That was an identity. And at the same time, she recognized that there's freedom in that invisibility. That if she's been disappeared from, if people don't assume that she can do anything, have any agency, have any creativity, then maybe that also means she can get away with stuff. So it's a double-edged sword. She recognizes that it gives her perhaps an opportunity because she is tempted off the straight and narrow.
She is. And I don't want to give away the story, but something definitely happens there where she, and as I said in the intro, if imagine if something happened to someone in your family that could have been prevented by somebody doing the right thing instead of the wrong thing. How far would you go? Have you struggled with that question yourself? Have you thought about that? Maybe not in real life, but in fantasy life?
I've thought about the fundamental question a lot about responsibility and accountability, not necessarily as it applies to my personal life, but in just in general in public life. You know, if someone in power does something that is the equivalent of throwing a stone into a pond, right? They have the power to throw a stone. The ripples spread out, and those ripples affect people in all kinds of ways. And the people they affect may not even be aware of where the ripple's coming from. But the people throwing the stone should think about that. They really need to be accountable. I remember years ago reading, and I think it's an Arthur Miller play. If I recall, I may be really out on a limb here, that of someone who was he was a business person, very successful, and he was making parts for an airplane. And he decided to cut corners and make a part that was cheap. And it ended up getting in an airplane that was piloted by his son, and his son died. Something like this. I mean,
Yeah.
and you may get a bunch of people calling and saying, "This is where she got it right."
It's a
Disclaimer,
different play.
but I was fascinated by that because it's like, how far back can you trace that thread? And one of the things that seems to me is the person who made those cheap parts knew they were making it cheap. That's a big important factor. They knew it. They knew they were cutting corners,
Right.
and they gave themselves permission and did not think beyond, like, how did the ripples fall out. And in the case in Frannie's situation, the person who threw the stone to make the ripple that affected her family so dramatically knew they were in the wrong, knew they were doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and did not examine the results of their actions, and were protected from it. And Frannie had just had enough of people in power being protected from the results of their bad actions.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought about it in the sense, if anyone was ever to hurt my children or my grandchildren, I can imagine I could be pretty revengeful.
Right.
You don't mess with my family,
Right. Well,
even though I'm a pretty nice person. But
yeah, and that's the truth of with Frannie. Her family was really broken, and she. One of the parts of being older in her mind is she also realized she might be able to get away with it
she did think
and not
that.
be caught. And of course, the thing is, how does that make her any different than the person that she is exacting her revenge upon? You know, so she has to grapple at a certain point with the fact that she has destroyed her own kind of sense of self, her own sense of herself as a bright person by
Yeah.
pursuing the revenge. So I just found it very juicy to think about accountability and responsibility and justice and complicity. I love that you use the word in the promo, because it's so true. Who is complicit in this?
Well, and that was what was so interesting. I mean, you threw in a couple of other characters, like the friend of the person who should have known better, and the man that she became friends with in this assisted living facility. And that just complicated it for her more. And, the secrets and the guilt and, oh my goodness.
The wrong person being blamed, and because of her, yeah. I mean, and it's so true that you never, that old kind of thing about a butterfly in the forest of the Amazon spreads its wings, the repercussions occur across the world.
Right.
And it's certainly true in her, in that among the characters that she's involved with, that her actions have all kinds of unforeseen consequences that she realizes are down to her and down to her poor judgment, really. And
Wow.
her one moment, her impulse of giving into her worst self, and so she has to grapple with that.
Feel the fact that you are aging, you're a boomer. How do you feel that impacted the development of this story?
Well, I mean, when my mother went into assisted living, many of us are grappling with older parents
Mhm.
and older relatives in general, and also I have children, so kind of caught in the midst, right, of caretaking for or caring about a generation ahead of us and generation behind us. And so the emotional realities of that, I think, were really important in the development. I've also, in my family, I wrote an article for Women Writers, Women Books. They asked about generational dilemmas and generational kind of dynamics. And in my family, my two of my brothers died unexpectedly
Hmm.
at a relatively young age, in their 40s, and they not long one after the other. So obviously, this was devastating to my whole family, but to my mother in particular, it was just she never really recovered from it, and so seeing the grief, how the grief impacted her physically and emotionally, seeing how family dynamics shift and change, and how they become that I think the emotional realities more than any specific um, circumstance, but the emotional realities of that come with getting older, you know, and come with knowing people who are old enough and being old enough to have lived through some stuff, and to have, even if it isn't exact circumstantially the same, to have the emotional emotional residue of that, linger. And that's what fiction does. I mean, fiction takes the kind of the emotional substance of life and repackages it in surprising ways.
Yeah, I
So
think that's a great answer because I think we are, as we get older, we go through stages where we recognize family dynamics differently at different stages. But I think as we get older, we do start to recognize the impact of things that happen to the family. And most of us want to protect the family, no matter how old we get, we still feel like the mother hen. We want to make everybody feel better.
right,
And
right.
that was definitely her motivation, even though it didn't
Yeah, her
work.
motives were good. The effects, not maybe not, but although it
Oh,
turned out all right in the end, just to
it
let
did turn out all right in the end. Thank goodness. I know.
redeem yourself and yeah.
She did. She did. Yeah. It was really an interesting book. I'm curious, Rebecca, you give teaching and advice to your students all the time. What's some of the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, that's a good question. Keep going. Uh, okay. This is again, it's a two-sided thing, right?
Okay.
One hand, keep going. On the other hand, know when to set something aside. Um, and they may seem opposite, but they're really not. In that, everything you work on, you learn from. And I have written a lot of things, made a lot of artwork that, in the end, despite how much I worked on it and how much I believed in it, just didn't quite gel. It wasn't quite right. But um, not. But you learn from that. Right? It's a huge opportunity to learn and to make yourself better, to be interested in your own life and your own process, and then to fold that into the next project. So knowing when to give up while at the same time not giving up in the larger commitment to yourself to write a book or to make some artwork or to perfect a recipe or whatever it is that you've committed to. So I think probably the biggest um, thing that I've learned is that, and that is part of being an artist, really, and a writer, any kind of creative person, maybe any kind of person, is that failure is uh, is important, and failure is not failing. That it's your failures are critical and important, and that's where you both learn the most, and also find identify your greatest strengths. Because in something that isn't working, there might be one thing, one thread that shines in the kind of mess, and that tells you a lot. So learning how to distinguish those things is I think part of the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because failure is such a loaded word,
It is.
right? But the way you described it, finding that one thread, it doesn't mean you're throwing everything out and starting over from scratch. It
Yes.
means that you're developing a new way of doing it or a new way of looking at it, or taking some things out and adding some new things. And it's a pivot, but it doesn't have to be a total disaster.
No. I remember years ago I was talking to someone, and I wish I could remember who it was, but I can't. It was a fellow writer who was much further down the road than me, and we were in a situation where they were had read something of mine and were giving me feedback, and they um, they asked me what I was working on, and I said I had been working on XYZ, but I had decided it wasn't working well, so I just deleted it. And the look on their face was so full of horror.
Oh.
And they said, "You deleted it?" And I said, No, I didn't actually delete it. I took it out of my active pile." And
Mm.
and they were so relieved. And and I and I understood why he looked so horrified, because even now I'll go back to things that I wrote that personally that I hate, that I think, "Oh, this is terrible. What was I thinking?" But we'll have a paragraph, or I'll remember,
Mhm.
it'll tickle something in me,
Mhm.
and or there'll be a character that I'll have loved, or a phrase that I'll have loved, and I'll go back there and I'll find that little glimmer, or I'll read it the whole thing and remind myself what I was thinking of, how far I've grown, and also recognize in retrospect some of the strengths that I always had, even in work that wasn't working. Um, so that look of horror was really telling for me, because more than anything else about that conversation, I remember, more than anything he said, I remember that look, that horrified, like, "Don't ever throw anything away.
Yeah.
Bury it where nobody else can get it, maybe." you know, which I do adhere to, because there's things in my computer I would absolutely cringe to have anyone else read. But
Yeah.
I am glad I have them um, to refer back to. So,
Well, and I do that too. I'll go back to things I've written years ago, and it'll spark an idea. Oh, I could do a show about that, or maybe I'll write a blog, or maybe the banter will be about that, those kinds
right,
of things.
right, right.
So let me just tell you all, you should have known a compelling book, that it says unputdownable. I agree. Unputdownable, definitely gives you some moral dilemmas to think about, and some interesting characters to think about and to cheer for and to maybe not cheer for. And um, yeah, and like Rebecca said, it does turn out well in the end. So we all going to go, whew, good sigh of relief there. Yeah, thank you for that, Rebecca. And then what a good conversation to taking us all the way from creativity to the moral dilemma, and then back to creativity.
Yeah, fail better. That's my final advice to myself.
Fail
Yeah,
better. That's a good one.
yeah.
Yeah. So if you'd like to learn more about Rebecca and some of the visual work that she does as well, in fact, she just got back from Greece where she was doing what did you call it? A sabbatical kind of
It
thing?
was a residency.
Residency.
Residency in through the Scopulos Foundation for the Arts. So thank you, Scopulos Foundation for the Arts. It was marvelous. It was on the island of Scopulos in the Aegean Sea, and
Nice.
I was making visual art. It was
So
marvelous.
yeah. So check out her website. It's RebeccaAKeller.com. And you can contact her through that site as well and learn about her art and some of the other, well, you can find the book there, all that other good stuff.
That's right. That's right.
Before I let you go, when you think about travel, please think about roadscholar.org/heyboomer. Check out some of the amazing trips that they have there. If you are interested in being creative yourself, you can get everything you need through annieskitclubs.com, and you can use promo code BOOMER and you will get 50% off on your next or your first order. So that's a lot of fun stuff there. And join us on the Boomer Banter tomorrow. We're going to talk about travel. I will talk a little bit about my Costa Rica trip, and then we're going to find out about some of your travel adventures. So if you'd like to be part of that and the Boomer community, send me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. All right, so next week, excuse me. Next week, my guest is Philip Martin. And Philip has been a friend of mine since I lived in Northern Virginia 10 years ago or so. We met at Rotary, and then he was my coach for a while. And he has extensive experience as an executive coach and a sales leadership coach. He and his beautiful wife, Donna, are the proud parents of a Tibetan Terrier. And over the past year, Philip has been writing a leadership book for kids. And he has used 2 Tibetan Terriers to teach these leadership lessons. Visually, the book is absolutely gorgeous. The pictures are fabulous. And these little Tibetan Terriers go on a journey and learn all kinds of things. And the lessons are written in a way that are easily accessible to young children. So Philip, another reinvention story from an executive coach and a sales leadership coach to now a children's book writer. So be sure and join us next week for that. And thank you, Rebecca, so much for your spending time with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. And I like to leave you all with the belief that you can live with courage, live with relevance, and live with curiosity. And remember that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream.
Hear, hear.
My name is Wendy Greene, and this has been Hey Boomer.